But this is the big one. The big one is around the deviations from normal bidding processes. If in a specific case it is impractical to invite competitive bids, the OAA may procure the required goods or services by other means, provided that the reasons for deviating from inviting competitive bids must be recorded and approved by the accounting officer and accounting authority. Now, this, by the way, is exactly what is included in the regulation. The regulation has accounting officer and accounting authority. They've decided to abbreviate it in the instructions. So just to be sure, very nice to see. I'm pleased actually that this is in there and it reflects exactly. So there's no issue now around the interpretation or misinterpretation, which we did have in previous practice notes between the practice note and the regulation. It is word for word described there. Very interesting, though, is the instruction has an emphasis on other means. It includes limited bidding, price quotations within the threshold determined by National Treasury instruction, and procurement that occurs in emergency situation and urgent cases. You'll note that there's no reference in here to sole source or single source. That has been included in the definition under limited bidding. But that's an important distinction, the focus in here on the other means. And the reason for that is all the other practice notes that we've had before have had a focus on impractical. And the practice notes described impractical and gave examples of the instances when things might be impractical. Very interesting that this instruction now is taking an emphasis on the other means. My apologies, let me just kill this now. So very, very important distinction there. And you'll see that this is got, I believe, some important implications for all of us in this this process. Now, the big issue is, and this is important, is the SCM policy must provide for procurement by other means. And it goes down into a level of detail, and this is something that National Treasury have picked up in the O2 instruction, where they've actually detailed the issues that need to be covered in the SCM policy. And these are not things that are typically included in other policies.
They have, well, now in terms of their things, right? They are
quickly, Nandi, we're just going to mute you there quickly. So these are important elements in the policy that must be included. Procurement by other means and any other procurement by other means that may be utilized. So they've described in A, 4.2a, B, and C, these issues of limited written price quotations within the threshold determined by National Treasury. I still need to try and unpack what this means. And then procurement that occurs in emergency situations and urgent cases. I was very pleased to see urgent came in, because that was dropped in, and it was only mentioned in, I think, the first practice note, where they tried to unpack what impractical means. But urgent has been dropped in subsequent ones, but is back here again. But this is important. So procurement by other means. And then 4.4b says the policy must have a plan to curtail reliance on procurement by other means. Now, there's no definition for what is a plan and the level of detail of that, but the policy must have a plan to curtail reliance. The policy must provide for the circumstances under which each procurement by other means may be utilized. A level of detail we've never had to include in a policy before. And then the processes to be followed in respect of identifying the prospective suppliers for and recording and approval of procurement by other means. So the process to follow to say, okay, this is the process we will follow to identify this bidder that we're going to do a sole source of, or this bidder that we're going to now request an urgent proposal from. That process must be included in the policy, as well as then a difficult one. This was asked by Veronica on the Telegram group a short while ago, the assessment of all instances that gave rise to procurement by other means. And we certainly don't have that at the moment. Now, you'll be asking, why is it that all these things need to be included in the policy? And that might come through in the next 3 sections. When procuring goods or services by the means, the AOAA must ensure that the institution complies with all applicable SCM prescripts. Fine. That within 14 days after finalization of the procurement by other means, the report the procurement to the relevant Treasury and the Auditor General of South Africa in the format determined by National Treasury. And then ensure that procurement by other means is recorded in the annual report of the institution in a format determined by National Treasury. Now, what's interesting here is this is it. If you are wondering, where is it that it says you need to ask National Treasury for approval, it's not here. So the reason for this emphasis in the policy is because the regulation is being closely followed by National Treasury. And the regulation very specifically said, recorded and approved by the accounting officer or accounting authority. It did not have and make any reference to National Treasury's involvement in the approval process. It's so very difficult to issue an instruction, again, that contradicts necessarily what the regulation says. So, in summary, change the focus from the impractical to the other means. The sole source and single source, by the way, is defined under the limited bidding. So it is there under limited bidding, although it wasn't specifically stated as one of those instances. Limited bidding describes sole source, single source, and multiple source, by the way. It's not necessary to request prior approval from the relevant Treasury for a deviation. Some would welcome that. I was interested to see that a number of people were saying, gee whiz, they should have kept this in. And the only requirement then is to report to the relevant Treasury within 14 days after finalization of the procurement. Now, instruction 02 actually refers to 10, but it's 10 working days. And this is 14 calendar days, if you like. So the 10 working days plus 2 weekends would include then the 14. So there isn't really a difference between these two. The instruction 03 does not refer to working days, it just refers to days. And then it needs to also be included in the annual report. One of the questions that we will be asking, you will need to answer as you're going through and doing your work on the policy is a competitive bid in this instruction the same as an advertised competitive bid in earlier prescripts? So earlier prescripts, there's reference to advertised competitive bid. There's no reference to open competitive bid or to advertised competitive bid in this instruction. So I'm wondering if a limited competitive bid would actually be considered an other means. But here's some questions, and I don't know. But fortunately, this is for you in your policy to figure out. Yes, the other means, emergency, urgent, sole source, single source, multiple source, and other practical. You may have some reference to that in your policy at the moment. I don't know whether direct negotiations, competitive negotiation, unsolicited bids, transversal contracts, piggybacking, framework contracts, panel agreements, syndicated sourcing, procurement agent would also be considered other means. I'm not sure at this point in time. And there would be many others as well that you could probably think of as well. And then finally, just to kind of illustrate the importance of the policy considerations in doing that. And in the instruction, it says the circumstances under which each procurement by other means may be utilized. And I just quickly looked at some of the work that we've done in this space just on sole source. You know, matching and standardization, spare parts, components, prototyping, joint ventures, design contests, unique expertise, intellectual property, innovation rights holders, the impractical issues, downstream, location, region, international agreements, legal directive, classified information, exceptionally advantageous conditions, failure of prior open tenders, commodity and market exchange might be another impractical reason for you to deviate. Now, these are conditions. These are the conditions under which you would use then one of the other means. This is a level of detail that I have not seen in policies to date. And if I was to look at the requirement of an instruction note, this is something that would need to be included then in your policy. Let's open up the discussion quickly then to see if there are any comments or any thoughts on this issue around deviations and some of the implications on this. Anyone want to kick off with a comment on this? Hey, Sikhle, welcome. We'll go to Sikhle and then we'll go to Tandiwe. Go ahead, Sikhle. I think you should be able to unmute. Let me just check. No, you can't. Yes, now you can. Go ahead, Sikhle. Sorry, I just turned off the, go ahead, there we are. Yes, we can hear you, go ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sean. Thanks for this discussion of this instruction note. My take on this one, I was very much concerned with the coming in the day before applicable the following day. That's very, very much concerning because it has got policy implications. And policy implications, meaning it needs to be included in the policy and something that you cannot just, for some scheduled institutions, something that you cannot just do it overnight. Because this is what they say, actual fact, do it overnight. And that's a very, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a wrong, or I don't know what kind of approach is it that Treasury is giving us. Because with the last instruction note, that not the last one, I think instruction note that talks to the threshold. They did sort of give an update to extend the date of implementation. So I think with this one, so also they ought to have, or they ought to review and look at the date of implementation. The second one.
So Claire?
Yes.
So on that question, okay, so this is, you're putting, yes, an unreasonable expectation on the organ of state to update the policy. What is the implication of that, though? I don't know if you've thought through what the implication of that is.
Sorry, you mean what implication of what?
So if you, for example, don't update the policy by the 1st of April, which many have not done, what is the implication of that?
The implication of that is that you, how do I put it? It says you must put it in your, you must do this in your, within a certain period. For example, the deviations, reporting of the deviations. Now the deviations that you are reporting, they are now, you are reporting them, you are now approving it within the institution. Now in our policy, it is indicated that it is approved according to the previous instruction note. Yeah. So because it is clear that it gives the authority on who has to approve the deviation. Now it's in the policy.
So now, I guess I'm asking that if you have a deviation with that, and you processed a deviation yesterday, for example, but you haven't updated the policy, would that then constitute irregular expenditure?
it will say your policy is not compliant with or is in contravention or is contradicting the instruction.
So it would just be a policy issue, a non-compliance with policy issue, but not necessarily illegal expenditure. Okay.
Yes.
You had a second point?
My second point was the introduction or reintroduction of the agent cases.
Yes.
That one, I found it a bit interesting because we had various issues about an agent case in terms of defining an agent and an emergency case. Now, when they are reintroduction and saying it is where early delivery is critical. Now, when does the situation become critical? How do you define a critical situation? What constitutes that the situation is now critical? That would be like my other thing is that, and also the last one. Now the deviations, they are saying also including the quotations in line with the threshold. So the quotations now start from 30 to 1 million. So a deviation of 35,000 must be reported. Must be reported to Treasury and AG, and also must be included in the annual report. So it's like really up to that low. I mean,
Good one.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Good. Thank you. Tandiwe, Ron, and then Brian. Go ahead, Tandiwe. Hey, Tandi.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, colleagues. I just wanted to sidetrack a bit on what Sika was raising on the issue of what you were asking about the implication of not updating the policy. When the regular expenditure guideline was issued the first time, one of the definitions of irregular was contravention with a policy. And I think some couple of months later, they actually updated it. And my thinking was, you would find certain organs of state where if you have competitive bidding process approved at 500,000, they reduce it to 300,000. And then sometimes they contravene with that, and that end up being irregular. So I think that was somehow maybe to control that situation where you have now irregular ballooning over and over because people are creating much more stricter controls in the environment. But contravention with the policy is that it becomes a housekeeping matter. From an audit point of view, they would definitely raise it as a non-compliance, but you would not have a situation whereby you would be found as irregular, unless, of course, you followed your policy that still contravenes with the practice note. What I wanted to talk to Sean was the issue around the competitive bidding, where you were asking about, is it advertised tenders? And you remember there's somewhere, again, now my mind is sitting between PFMA and MFMA. Please forgive me on that one. I'm not sure where. But a competitive bidding system was basically a tender system, whereby when you go above a threshold where you get into a tender system, it's a competitive bidding system. But when you talk about English now, in municipalities, you do find instances where they advertise procurement above 50,000, and one can still deem it as competitive. So I think it will depend in terms of, are you looking at it from a legislative point of view or from an English-speaking point of view? But competitive bidding system, I think somewhere, either in municipal regulation, they were actually meaning that it's all the transactions above a tender threshold thing. Lastly, on the other means, you mentioned a whole lot of options there in terms of now what we have to look at in terms of what other means are. And I think what maybe would be a point of departure or perhaps a guide for us. Guys, we still have section 217 that talks about 5 pillars of procurement. So I think that whatever it is that you're doing, it should not be in contravention with those, because now the question will then be, is single source fair? Is it transparent? Is it competitive? Is it cost effective? Is it equitable? If the answer is yes, then you can go for single source. You can go for piggyback, whatever the case may be. But I think that as everybody has been saying, that this is actually throwing back everything back to the accounting officers to develop a policy that talks to environment.
That's it. Thanks, Tandi. Good points. Hey, Ron. Ron, I'm sure that this is not what you would like to be doing on a Wednesday morning, is trying to understand what National Treasury has put out. But we are where we are.
Thanks, Sean. Sean, one of the first speaker did say that The interpretation is that this applies over 30,000. Is that also your interpretation?
I'm not sure, Ron. I don't know what B means. There certainly is no reference anywhere to 30,000 outside of the now defunct 2017 regulations. There's no 30,000 in instruction 02, so certainly not 30,000. If this is what it says it is, this would be above 2,000. And I think there is a reference somewhere else where it says anything above petty cash would need to be included. Yeah, no, that's around the SPD4. We'll get to that just now. Your thoughts, Ron?
Yeah, so Sean, they haven't given a threshold. Unless I'm missing something, there is no threshold. So in a sense, you know, it's like the triple PFA regulations. In the absence of an amount, this thing is now void, unless I'm missing something. But they haven't given a threshold. They haven't referred this to another threshold or whatever.
Or another instruction, those two.
Yeah. So unless they plan to come out with another instruction on a threshold, you know, and even petty cash, you know, petty cash is a threshold.
Sure.
So, you know, so this is incredibly open-ended. You know, it seems to apply to everything, which is just whatever. So that's just a first question of clarification. The second one is they've got a requirement to curtail. So you must come up with a plan to curtail. That's nonsensical. You know, in our context, you know, when we are doing major innovation, we actually increase, you know, other means. We have an increase in sole source. We have an increase in the other means. So for me, you know, it presupposes you're not doing innovation, which is ridiculous. And it's the normal trend National Treasury seem to have of discouraging, you know, innovation by default, not by intent, but by default. So that's just ridiculous. Then the, you know, well pointed out about other means. But from your presentation, and maybe from here, they seem to be conflating other means with impracticality. In fact, if you look at your presentation, your last point in the left-hand column was other impracticalities or other impractical means. Okay? You know, other impractical. Sorry, go down to the slide you're on there. You see there you're using impractical. Okay? So, you know, our National Treasury, or is it ourselves who are conflating, you know, circumstances with impracticality?
I agree, Ron, and I'm not sure that I've got in my mind yet that distinction between the other means and the conditions that we would use those different. You know, urgent and emergency are two circumstances. You know, how we describe the other means, I don't know. It's not clear to me either.
Yeah, for me, there's a conceptual issue, and then just on the issue of days, Sean.
Yeah,
there is a contradiction there. You know, I know Helen Fentz has written something in that book you both wrote on the definition of day. Day is a very complex issue.
Yeah.
When we read this, I also read it like you did, 14 days being 14 calendar days. But we can't assume that 14 calendar days equals 10 working days.
Correct.
Because those working days, you know, or the 14 calendar days may be 14 days of holidays.
Sure.
So, you know, there is a possible contradiction there. You know, and the term day, I think in this context normally means calendar days. But thanks, Sean.
Good one. And yeah, next week there's only 4 working days. And the week after, there's only 4 working days. So there would be a contradiction there. Thank you. Brian?
Thanks, Sean. My comment is really with regards to the implementation of this new instruction note.
Yeah.
What we have done last week when the instruction note was basically first came out.
Brian, you're in Schedule 2, hey?
Yeah, we immediately sent a request to National Treasury to ask for an extension on the implementation of that instruction note, because it's very important for us that we ultimately consider the impact that it will have on the business when we're looking at the business decisions, obviously through the DOA, the policies and procedures that we need to look at or to revisit, the impact on our procurement cycle. Obviously, we see a lot of upside to this.
Did you get a response from Treasury?
And actually, yesterday I communicated with the lady that we normally deal with. And at that point, she said they can't do us now because there was no publication of the instruction note, but it was obviously published the day before. And I then sent to her, okay, so I was therefore then assume that since it's now been published, that hopefully we will now get a response in terms of our application. So I'm hoping that we will hear something from them before they enter this week, because as you would obviously give someone more power, there's obviously more risks and obligations that's associated with that power now. And we need to carefully consider all of those. And obviously, like I said, there's a lot of upside, but we need as an organization to make sure that we are prepared for obviously all of those risks and obligations that's associated with this instruction note. So we're waiting for that for now. So that is basically just my comment on that application or the implementation of the new instruction note. Thanks, Sean.
Good one, Brian. You are on that Telegram group. Just give us a heads up when you do get that response.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Sikle, you want to come in again? Hi, Sikle, you can unmute. Yes, go ahead.
Sean,
we can hear you.
At actual fact, the point raised by Ron is correct. I was wrong when I say it's from 30,000. There's no reference to 30,000.
Right.
But if you look at the instruction on 4.2b, it says it's applicable by other means to written price quotations within the threshold determined by Treasury instruction. There's already a Treasury instruction which talks to a written price quotation from 2,000 up to $1 million.
So, sorry, can I come in at that?
Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, so this is within the threshold.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? So let's assume it's between 2 and $1 million. I mean, clearly it's egregious that they want to exclude above $1 million. Can you see what I'm saying? This thing is so badly drafted. I mean, surely they are saying it's above 2,000. But this one says you stop at $1 million, which is ridiculous. It's within the threshold.
Yes.
Unless I'm missing something, maybe it's my interpretation, but you normally would use the word above the threshold, not within.
Yes. Thank you.
Sikle, the other one is somebody like Brian and all the others that are online now that are in Schedule 2s, that instruction 02 doesn't apply to them. They use different quotation thresholds.
That is the problem. Also, that same instruction doesn't apply to Schedule 3D, which I'm in.
Exactly.
So,
you're in a 3D. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, I'm in a 3D. So that's what I'm trying to say now. They've determined, now they are saying we must go to that instruction note that doesn't apply to our institutions. And then they say this one applies to us. And they are referring us to that instruction note. So that's why it's
basically, yeah. If you do send that email through to Treasury, you might also ask them to explain this. And yeah, good one. All right, thank you. Let's move on. This is
sorry, Sean, can I
go ahead?
Back
thank you, Ron. Yeah.
To the very valid point raised about immediate application.
Yeah.
So I know Prof here once said there's nothing in law that says you can claim impossibility, but I disagree. You know, here they are coming at a certain time on the 31st of the 3rd, And they expect that the entire board must now meet on the next day with comprehensive details of plans and circumstances and everything else. That's clearly an impossibility. And I can virtually guarantee there is nobody, including National Treasury, who would have a board approved, a policy approved on the 1st.
Yeah, agreed.
So, and why I'm upset, Sean, is we put it in the consultation. We always put it in. That it's arrogance on the part of National Treasury to assume immediate application. And we've detailed that any policy change goes through a process. It goes through a process of thinking, a process of consultation, a process of looking at impacts on systems, on people, on staffing, on capacity, on whatever, you know, and then it goes through a governance process and a quality assurance process. Normally that takes months. And normally you slot these policies into your board cycle, which is normally on a quarterly basis. So for me, this is not just a simple thing. We write to National Treasury and say, can you give us an extension? For me, this is a systemic issue where they ask for consultation and then ignore it. And why that's even more egregious is that one of Treasury's values is consultation. Possibly they should add another value, that they listen to the consultation. Yeah. Sure. Thanks.
Thanks. The other thing that I'm very aware of as well, and this is might be what Thandi is raising, is you've just gone through a whole urgent process to update your policy because of the preferential procurement issues. And now you have something else that gets landed on top of the institution as well with some more policy changes. Thandi?
Sean, I wanted to request that you enable the chat. You disable.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Ah, there we are. Got it. Good. Thank you. Okay, let's have a look at the next section. The next